everybody. Artistry and Finesse with you for the first of a two-part Bachelorette season finale. Finesse, I just walked in the door about 5 minutes ago from the Penguin game. I'm coming to this completely fresh, completely vulnerable. Mrs. Artistry greeted me by saying she didn't understand how I was going to do the podcast tonight because I couldn't possibly understand the emotion of tonight's episode. So I have a lot of expectations. I don't know quite what to feel. I need you to walk me through this.
Did you say Penguin game?
Did I say Penguin game?
I think you might have said the Penguin game. But either way, this episode tonight was as emotional as it's ever been on this show. There were walls up. There were walls down. There were tears. There was heartbreak. And together, we're going to get through it on this podcast. I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to take you through date by date. People are going to get the rawest of the raw emotion from you. And we'll just lean on each other when necessary to get through it. But I want to start with something you said, because you called it part one of the finale. And it's my position that that's a bait and switch. There's one finale. It's next week. This is Fantasy Suite week.
Yeah, was this about downplaying the Fantasy Suite aspect of the episode, or was there more to it than that?
Well, I think
it's fine for you to take a position on this because you watched the show. Again, you're my shepherd.
Okay, but when have we ever had to watch the show to take a position on the show?
It's a great point.
I mean, you're about to take a lot of positions on the show, and you haven't watched anything.
All right, this is torture. So tell me.
So we're starting off. We're in Antigua, or Antigua, as I don't know whether it's they keep saying Antigua. I always thought it was Antigua. The first segment, it's your traditional, go back through the history with all three gentlemen. She said, Chris is perfect for me in so many ways. I trust him with my heart. I definitely think he would protect it. I think it's hard to argue against that proposition. I mean, I think Chris would be there to protect their heart. She said something about Drew. I crossed it off. It was too boring. I didn't get it down. And she said, Brooks is unlike anyone I've ever known. Funny, goofy, adventurous, spontaneous, but still deep.
Has anyone ever been this transparent at this stage about who they love?
I certainly haven't seen this before, and we'll get into this, but the people should know that as soon as this transparency was evident a few weeks ago, what did we say? We said, don't get sucked in. Don't invest in Brooks, whatever you do. So, and then you see a lot in the preview, a lot of tears. There's going to be a lot of crying coming later on.
Put your money on Drew and Chris. What's the other guy's name?
Drew and Chris. That's what you're saying. You're saying put your money on Drew and Chris.
Yes.
So after this first segment, you're sitting there. You've seen what I've just told you. You would have turned to Mrs. Artistry. You would have said, honey, I know I've said this to you a million times. Don't get sucked in.
Absolutely, because as we said last week, they don't do the double feint. They only do the single feint. They're incapable of the double switcheroo.
Now, does Mrs. Artistry know this? Like, would she?
I think she feels it.
Like, would she invest her whole heart in Brooks at this point? Or is she, or her, is she a veteran enough of the show that she looks at it the way we do, or does she just get lost in the fairy tale?
Well, let's ask her. Babe, did you invest in Brooks 100% going to this episode, or were your walls up? Speed up the response a little bit. So were your walls up? Were your walls down?
This is fascinating.
Yeah, her walls were up.
Answer the question that's asked, Mrs. Artistry. Are the walls up or down, All right, so first date is with Drew. He's very boring. you know, Des, to pass the time, she talks about her love for Antigua, not for Drew. And that's a huge warning sign. And I thought that the biggest warning sign for Drew, and I guess I shouldn't say it's a warning sign, but as soon as I say what happens, you'll know it's a warning sign. They went to go dance with the locals, and Drew said he thinks it would always be this way.
That's just the worst possible omen right there.
Well, it gets worse.
If you find yourself dancing with the locals in like a marketplace, just kiss your.
Well,
kiss your
that's
ass
exactly what they were doing. They were shaking maracas. They were doing the limbo with the locals. I mean, you might as well like have one hand on your iPhone booking a flight home because
that's the Bachelorette saying. Rather than be with you one-on-one right now, I would rather dance in a marketplace with complete strangers. That's
right.
all that's saying.
I need the safety of these people from Antigua that I've never met. But it got worse because as soon as they got some alone time, the first thing they go to is exchanging the I'm glad you're here's. I'm glad you're here. I'm really glad that I'm here on this date with you. Isn't it great that we're here together? Just, you know.
What you have to listen to there is what's unsaid. And what's unsaid is, I'm glad you're here because if you weren't, the show would be over and we wouldn't be in Antigua. That's what's not being said.
And I'm glad you're here even though you have to be here. Contractually obligated to be here right now.
Right. It's like saying, I'm glad you're here on the Men Tell All.
But the worst omen from this episode, without a doubt, was she's making out with Drew. Of course it rains. It rains every time they go to an island. He's holding the umbrella over them while it's raining. She takes the umbrella from his hand while they're kissing and holds it herself. And I'm watching this and I'm saying to myself, if he can't protect Des from the rain...
How's he going to protect her heart?
How is he going to protect her heart? I have that right now.
Exactly. Truer words have never been spoken. I know where this is headed. This is headed right down Chris's alley. That's where this is headed.
Well, that's what you think. But before you get to Chris's alley, she does make a stop in the fantasy suite with Drew.
So is she one of those that makes a big deal before the fantasy suite about how nothing's going to happen? She just wants to get to know you? Or what kind of a bachelorette is she?
Well, she didn't say nothing was going to happen. What she did is she gave the fantasy suite card to Drew and said, what do you think about this? And then rather than him saying, like, I'm very excited at the potential to have sex with you in the next 45 minutes, it was, I think this is a great opportunity for us to spend more time together, get to know each other. I'm very comfortable with where I'm at with my feelings and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, they go into the fantasy suite, and then it's really the wheelhouse of the fantasy suite is the wet kissing that happens in that 10-second window when the cameras leave but the mics are still on.
Right.
And there was a vigorous, wet, loud, lip-smacking kissing going on during that time.
How could you rate the level of moisture there? I mean, what led you? Was it just a sound? Was there like sloshing going on, or did you actually see moisture?
Well, you didn't see it because the cameras were gone. What it sounded like, it sounded very similar to the rain hitting the umbrella, and I think it kind of comes full circle with the imagery.
Is that like a hard rain, or is it just like a drizzle?
It was a hard rain, like a heavy rain, but not a storm. There was no thunder, no lightning. It wasn't that passionate.
That's significant. Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that.
So she ends it. She says, "I just want to give him the world," and that's that. And now we're off. We're off Drew. We go to Brooks, and it looks like it's going to be Brooks going on the next date, except for we find out that Brooks is in Idaho. Brooks has gone. Now, what does that mean to you? I said he's in Idaho, and you had a reaction. What are you feeling right now?
Well, I'm let down, and I wish I could say I was completely surprised. I think that I'm a bit offended. It seems to me that Brooks doesn't respect the viewer, and he doesn't respect Des enough to at least let us know that he's going to Idaho and why. unless it was a family emergency. I'm not discounting that possibility.
It almost sounds like
family emergency. If it's a family emergency, it's a different standard.
You know what?
If it's
not
a family emergency, then I have an issue with what Brooks did.
Why don't you have some conviction in your principles? What you should be saying is either he can go to Idaho or he can't go to Idaho. It doesn't matter whether there's a family emergency.
Listen to me.
You're too many caveats.
Listen to me. I've been through a lot in this life. Okay? My years on this earth should gain me something. And what I think in this particular situation they should gain me is the right to say, if it's a family emergency, I'm holding Brooks to a different standard.
What if I told you that it wasn't a family emergency, it was an emotional emergency?
It was a love emergency?
It was a love emergency. So Brooks has to go to Idaho because he needs to talk to his mother and his sister about what he's been feeling since hometown. And he reveals that he's uncomfortable proposing to Desiree, and he can't say that he loves her yet.
He had to go to Idaho for that?
He had to go to Idaho. This is not a conversation you have over the phone.
What do you think Chris Harrison is for?
Well, let me tell you something. We're not done with Chris Harrison yet, because what Chris Harrison does in this episode is he might be the first guy in this ever to win an Oscar for a performance on television. It was that special what Chris Harrison brought to the table later in the episode. But so he goes to Idaho and he says to his family, I'm not sure that I'm in love with Des. I don't know what to do. And they say, they give him they give him the opposite of the blessing, which is I don't know if it's the opposite, but it's sort of a variation on the blessing. It's like, I bless you to do whatever you want. If you don't like her, you have my blessing not to like her. You just have to be honest and follow your own heart. Have we seen that blessing before?
More questions? Did they ask any more questions? The obvious answer to which is, I shouldn't be on this show anymore?
Well, they just said, you need to be honest.
Right.
It's your decision. You need to do what you feel is right.
If you never went to Antigua to propose to Des, would you care? That kind of a question. And the obvious answer, I think, at this point is no, I wouldn't care that much.
It doesn't seem at this point in the episode like he would care. And they make you think that you're about to go to Brooks in Antigua, but they switch it up on you, and you see Chris come out after the next commercial, and we're going right to Chris's date.
All right, take me through it.
He's truly, madly, deeply in love with Des. They go immediately onto the rocks. They're sitting on the rocks, professing their love for each other, when out of nowhere, a helicopter comes through to pick them up from one set of rocks, take them by helicopter to a different set of rocks on a different island in the Caribbean, where they will then sit in the sand and have what I believe is Dez's 100th picnic in the last 6 weeks.
With a poem.
Well, there was a poem later. But what I want to say about these picnics is, like, what if you're one of those guys, and I count myself as one of these guys, who hates sitting on the ground to eat? Like, what if you just, like... You
have to sit Indian style?
You're just on a blanket, and you're, like, rolling around and fidgeting.
What are you doing?
There's sand in your potato salad. It's like, if I could just get a chair...
You're not one of those guys that likes to sit Indian style. You don't sit like in the yoga pose.
Native American style on this podcast. Get it right, okay? Don't you remember that Catherine won last season? Everything's different now. We live in a post-racial podcast world.
My point is, you're right about that.
Yeah, it's like,
agree.
If I went on this show and I show up to every date with a fold-out chair, like just in case a picnic pops up, does that mean I'm too high maintenance? Could I still get a rose in that scenario?
It's hard to know.
They recap the nasal specific from the last week. They go have another one of those dinners where they're facing the cameras, not each other, and awkwardly turning to the side. There's an enormous amount of crickets in the background making lots of noise. He asks her whether she'd be comfortable moving to Seattle. He got a new job in Seattle, apparently. She hems and haws for a while and then said she thinks she'd be open to moving there. She gives him the fantasy suite card, and they're so... when did this show, and when did love in general become such a serious endeavor? No one has cracked a joke on this show, except for Zach once last week, in 4 years.
Yeah.
Can someone say, comment on the absurdity of her handing a fantasy suite card over that another, 44-year-old man wrote by hand?
No, it would shatter the illusion, which is it's sacred to us. You can't shatter that. If somebody cracked a joke, when are you going to crack a joke? Are you going to... if we were on this show, we would crack the joke at the most inopportune time, right at the moment that we're being told about the tree that fell on the person's friend. Well, and it would just everything would fall apart.
Yeah, the joke
can't happen.
The joke would come right after you heard that story.
Right, and that just can't happen on this show. You can't mess with the formula. Just forget it.
And so when he's presented with the cards. With the date or with the fantasy suite card, he says, if this were to happen, I definitely want to watch the stars. And I don't know if that's a literal thing that he's saying, or is that some newfangled sexual thing that kids are saying these days? I mean, what does that mean? Does he really think this is what she wants to hear?
He wants to watch the stars if they go to the fantasy suite?
Yes, he says if this were to happen, if we were to go to the fantasy suite, I definitely want to watch the stars.
He doesn't understand what the nature of the fantasy suite is.
Yeah, right.
Somebody's got to educate him.
Right. I think maybe next season, Chris Harrison needs to be a little more specific about what's supposed to happen in the fantasy suite.
Sit these guys down and explain it to them.
Right. I mean, you're being a little naive, Chris. Come on. But they get to the fantasy suite. He writes a poem. It's the same as always, meaningless poem. And
Dez is sitting on the bed going, can we get on?
Can we get this started? Well, they're in the pool, and they're making out in the pool. And I think a good sign for Chris is that Dez had no hesitancy in getting her hair wet in the pool. Ooh. Which is very kind of carefree and... if I'm Chris, I'm interpreting that, more to the green light category than the red light category about what might happen in the fantasy suite.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So they go in the fantasy suite, and then whatever happens, happens. We don't really know. So she's 2 for 2 in the fantasy suite.
Wow. So where is Brooks while all this is happening?
Wow.
Does Dez know yet that Brooks isn't even there?
Well, Brooks... when he was in Idaho, was saying he has a flight the next day to Antigua. So now this is where the
one
genius...
of the many nonstops from Idaho to Antigua.
Yeah, I think you could pick that up. I think JetBlue, they have that. That's funny. All right. So this is when the real genius of the show comes into play, because it's now all about editing, right? They're editing her saying... I have the strongest feelings for Brooks. If he got on one knee right now and said, "Will you marry me?" I would marry him. And all this is happening while he's saying, "I need to go talk to Chris Harrison because I have feelings that I need to understand better."
Damn right, you need to go talk to Chris. What were you doing in Idaho?
Right. Why waste the trip to? I mean, I think if he flies to Idaho on his own dime and submits that receipt to the show for reimbursement. They say no. We have your mom and sister here. They're in the form of Chris Harrison.
Right.
He knows you better than they do. He knows what this process is all about.
If Chris Harrison were in Idaho, I would understand, but he wasn't. He was in Antigua.
And this is like at 9:10. So what's going to happen in the next hour is just gets exhausting, but it's emotional. So Brooks says to Chris Harrison that he's not ready to say that Dez is the love of his life. And Chris, in a way that only Chris can do, says, "Are you not?" He says, Are you not sure? Or are you telling me that you are not in love with this girl? And Brooks says, I don't know. But he's going to leave. He needs to go. He needs to talk.
I got to take off my headset for a second. Okay, I'm back.
Okay. He says, Brooks
Just
says...
needed to collect myself.
He says he's going to go. Brooks is going to... He has to talk to Des. He needs to tell her where his heart is at, and he's going to go. Des is not the love of his life, he says.
So let me just get this straight. He goes to Idaho. He talks to his family. He comes to no decision. Flies to Antigua. Talks to Chris Harrison for about, sounds like 45 seconds. And then decides he's leaving again.
He makes an immediate decision with Chris Harrison. And
well, that's what happens when you look into Chris Harrison's eyes.
Chris was running an absolute clinic. Because after Brooks is sort of, he's sort of anguished in revealing all this about himself. And Chris just looks at him and he goes, your parents got divorced. I know that was tough. And just totally breaks him down.
Started to cry?
Brooks is like beside himself. He's so emotional. He's so conflicted. He doesn't know what to do. I mean, the deconstruction of Brooks should have been the title of this episode. Chris Harrison just totally knocked everything he had down. And he just think
about how much Chris Harrison could charge as a therapist. An unlicensed therapist. I mean, people would pay thousands of dollars a session. At least.
And you only need one session.
And you're done.
Yeah, 15 minutes with Chris Harrison and it's over. You're cured.
It's amazing. So
Brooks' whole thing is that he wants to feel more pain when he loves. He wants it to hurt. And he doesn't hurt about Des. And his hair was looking a little gray, I gotta say. He had a lot of gray going on. And I think that's something that's important that we'll come back to at the end. But she's professing her love for him and her part of the edits. Her total, complete devotion. Like, the show has broken every rule. She says he was going to win. He's the love of her life. Blah, blah, blah. He pulls her aside. They go sit on the end of this, 100-yard long pier in Antigua. They're both... She sees that something's up. She starts crying before he even says anything. He starts getting nervous. He basically says to her, I feel the love in the moments that we're together, but I lose it when we're apart. And then he just drops the hammer and just gives her the hug and says, I'm sorry. And she's just out for the count. I mean, full weeping. She gets herself into a ball, like a protective ball. And she's totally defeated.
Right then and there, she's in a ball, or does she go?
No, she's right on the bench, right next to Brooks. She
curls into a ball right there. She puts up the foot. That's not just putting back up your walls. That's putting like a tortoise shell around yourself.
But she does that, and then she emerges out of the tortoise shell to say, I still love you regardless. She's saying, I don't even care that you just broke my heart. I love you.
What?
I mean, she is totally convinced herself that Brooks is the man of her dreams forever and ever and ever. And he's just...
This is not the playbook.
And when she says, I love you to him, he's taken aback. He's aghast. And he goes, why didn't you say that to me earlier? And she says, I couldn't. They're not allowed, they don't let me. So, I mean, it's such a ridiculous conversation. And he starts feeling, it looks like, a little bit of regret about having just broken up with her. Because now he knows that he would have won. So I think, part of you, and this is what I want to get your take on.
Brooks was playing defense.
Exactly.
All along.
Did he break up with her because he was afraid he wasn't going to win?
How could he be so blind?
And this is did the show's rules in this case, which are usually made with the very best of intentions, the rule that she can't say "I love you" to him, actually come back to hurt her in the end and break her heart.
We've come full circle.
We've come completely full circle. I mean, are you shocked by this? Are you stunned, or is this? Have you seen it all at this point, and you're sort of not moved by this?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not moved, but I'm just thinking back at their last several dates, and I got to tell you, watching these dates, I kind of see where Brooks is coming from, because there didn't seem to be a lot of chemistry on these dates. They seem to be very labored. They're, clearly Des, and we knew this because we're privy to the voiceovers and the behind-the-scenes stuff, but she was sort of nervous. She was reserved around them, because I feel like, it's when you are really shy around somebody you really like and you're maybe not yourself. She wasn't able to let loose with him. And I think that he just read that, understandably, as a lack of interest.
Is it just, this could be the most heartbreaking miscommunication ever.
It's a really bad miscommunication, and I blame the producers. I think somebody should have passed her a note or something.
Right, and or passed him a note and said, dude, don't leave. Like, you're going to be okay. And
well, whenever somebody says they've got to fly home to get counseling, I think that's encouraged. It's not discouraged. They like that sort of thing. They want there to be that sort of drama. But maybe they just let this go a little bit too far.
It's good footage. Anytime you can get Brooks' sister on the episode 2 weeks in a row with his mother.
Anytime he goes back to Idaho, it's a good thing. For ratings.
So he's gonna go. Like they're walking back from the pier. He's saying, "I don't know what to do. What am I supposed to do?" Like he's fidgeting with his hands. He doesn't know where to put his hands. All this stuff. And my thought during this time is, I get over people when they want to leave the show. I care about who's still on the show. So I'm thinking about Chris and Drew at this point.
Of course you are.
And both of them, at various points in their dates, said that they would always protect Dez's heart. Where were they? Where were Chris and Drew?
Offering no
during protection. The breakup. I mean, her heart has never been more exposed, more vulnerable than it was on the end of that pier with Brooks.
Her heart was out exposed on the end of the pier, just beating there while her torso is curled up, on a bench. And her heart starts sitting there. Nobody's even paying attention to her heart.
Right. She's walking back this path.
And throbbing, right.
And her heart is there.
All they need to do is go over and pick up the heart. That's all they needed to do.
If one of them had emerged from the water like a scuba diver, grab the heart, put it in a waterproof cooler with ice packs in it, and they could have brought that next week on quote part 2 of the finale, and resuscitated the love for her. But
something.
They weren't there.
Just make an effort.
Right. I mean, it's as much of a sign, as bad as it was for Brooks to leave, it tells you so much about Chris and Drew that they weren't there to protect her heart. So at this point,
I mean, between Brooks and his indecision and Chris and Drew and their not being there with her heart, she must have just wanted to walk away from the whole ordeal.
Well, they go to her interview after Brooks is being driven away in the car, and he's now crying in the car. He thinks maybe he made a big mistake. She says that she can't love these 2 men left as much as they deserve to be loved. It's over.
Oh, no.
And that's how the episode ends.
Oh, no.
I know.
I didn't think... I thought I'd seen it all.
Well, you haven't seen it all. You didn't watch. I mean, this was their Emmy episode. This is what they submit to the Emmy Academy.
It's not that I haven't seen anything yet. I just haven't seen anything.
It was like it was just stunning. And then as, you know, I wish I had more information for you, but as you know is my policy, I don't watch the previews for the next week. So I don't know what happened.
How am I even going to sleep tonight? So what do you see? What's your heart telling you? What do you see happening next?
Well, my heart tells me that it's going to be, I know it's a live studio audience. So I think what's going to happen is that it's going to be like an hour of her telling Drew and Chris that she doesn't love them. And then an hour of just disgusted, shocked, horrified faces on the middle-aged women in the live studio audience.
Right.
And a lot of Chris Harrison going up and down the aisle saying, like, what do you think about, you know, is Chris's love for Des genuine? And all these types of questions.
So in your view, does it really come down to whether Brooks makes a decision to come back and give this a shot, or do you see another twist coming?
I don't see a twist with her picking one of the other guys. I just don't. She was emphatic that it was over. I understand she was emotional coming off of having intimate relations with two men before being dumped by the love of her life, which was a different guy than one of those two men. I know that can be painful. I know it's very painful.
It's painful for everyone, yeah.
It's very painful to be broken up with by someone for whom you've known for 6 weeks and made zero sacrifices for and changed nothing in your life for. I know that hurts. But I think it's over. I really think it's over. I don't think there's another twist coming.
And she's with no one.
I think she ends with no one.
Well, you have to hand it to her. She's genuine. I mean, she's made no bones about her feelings for the last several weeks. And if this is the way it ends, this is what the heart wants.
The question left, though, assuming it's over, is about Brooks. What does he do next? Could Brooks be the next Bachelor, or do you think that his hair is too polarizing?
Well, I think the first thing he needs to do is go back to Idaho and regroup.
Get a little bit more guidance.
Hunker down in Idaho. Do a little bit more talking with the family, vetting of the issues.
Well, you remember Brad Womack went to therapy for like 3 years after his.
Yeah, he did a lot of jogging. And,
go jog on a beach in Texas.
Yeah, I think that we may never hear from Brooks again. This may have completely broken Brooks. I think he came into this show thinking that he was going to find love, and then he realized, wait a minute, I'm on a nationally televised program. There are other gentlemen here. And I don't really know how to handle this. And I think he was broken. I don't think he's man enough for Des. I really don't.
Well, he's either broken or he finds some resolve within himself and finds himself some HGH, gets his ass to the beach, starts running up and down the beach, get on a balcony. This could be like a Rocky Apollo Creed relationship with Brad Womack. I think you should seek out Brad Womack. Right. Brad
Womack train him.
This is almost the same plot line as Rocky 3.
And give him therapy.
Right.
That's what needs to happen.
Emotional therapy, physical therapy. I want a jacked up Brooks coming back as the Bachelor.
Or he could go the Drago route, as you suggest, and just take a lot of HGH, get on a treadmill, turn himself into a loving machine.
If you want to say that, if you want to extend the analogy all the way to Rocky 4, then what you're looking at is a scenario where Brad Womack trains Brooks for the next season, but then the season after that, Brad Womack himself comes back as the Bachelor, much the way Apollo Creed came back for the exhibition fight against Drago. And Brad Womack gets killed on The Bachelor by a Russian woman.
I would watch that.
I think all of America, it would galvanize America and divide the world.
Well, we've got a lot to look forward to.
That's it. I mean, maybe you have it DVR'd, maybe you talk it over with Mrs. Artistry, but that's all I can give you. I have nothing left to tell you about this episode. It was shocking. It was emotional. The emotions were raw on TV. The emotions were raw in my living room. The emotions are raw on this podcast.
Yeah, it really sounds that way. I'm not sure which direction I go tonight. I'm not sure if I watch part of this. I may just have to ask Mrs. Artistry to hold me for a little while.
Yeah,
because this is tough. All right, so I'm back on board for next week for the grand finale. I know you are too. Really looking forward to it. Hope you'll join us, everybody. Until next time, the Big Kibitz.
Time to kibitz, time to kibitz, time to kibitz. It's the big kibitz. Come and kibitz with the big kibitz. Ooh, big kibitz. Big. It's the big kibitz. Come and kibitz with the big kibitz.